Welcome to Herself, a space for women to have deep conversations about the intersection between spiritual entrepreneurship and fulfilling your potential, so you can become the woman you truly are in every area of your life. After being in business for over 2 decades, I've learned, as you likely have too, that as you grow your business grows you in unexpected, often challenging, yet miraculous ways. Here, we'll talk about how to get out of your own way so you can grow a business that's abundant and sustainable while allowing you to be a force for good in the world. I'll give you simple, actionable strategies as well as wisdom and inspiration to help you root into your wholeness, lead from your values, and work in ways that feel deeply aligned so you can bring your true self into the world through your business and in every area of your life. Hey there, beautiful. This August, I am stepping away from the mic to honor 2 major life transitions: getting married and moving to France. Yes, it is a season of deep change, and I am choosing to savor it fully. But even as I step back, I still want to show up for you in a meaningful way. So this summer, I'm bringing you a curated series of powerful conversations with some of the most respected voices in the internal family systems, or IFS, community. And these episodes explore what it really means to do our inner work, not by fixing or forcing ourselves, but by meeting every part of us with compassion and curiosity. This work has transformed not only my own healing, but also the way that I support my clients. And I know it will speak to you too. So whether you're hearing these episodes for the first time or revisiting them with fresh ears and a fuller heart, may they be a mirror, an anchor, a reminder of your own inner wisdom. I will be back with brand new episodes in September, broadcasting from my new home in France. Until then, may this season bring you clarity and deep nourishment. And now, here's this week's conversation. We're talking here now about something that until recently has been a fringe conversation in the IFS community: unattached burdens, or UBs for short. Thanks to the new book by IFS practitioner, teacher, and author Robert Falconer, with whom we're speaking today, this topic has slowly become more widespread and accepted. But stay with me. It can sound a little bit out there, but in reality, UBs are a lot more common than you might think. There's something that both I and people close to me have experienced, and there's something that I've helped clients clear as well. Think about it. We can experience lasting wounds in a variety of ways. The most commonly known ones are through injurious personal experiences like being bullied, or more of a big T or even another kind of little t trauma, or by inheriting wounds from our culture, as is the case with different kinds of ancestral trauma or white supremacy or the patriarchy. Yet there's another way that we can be negatively impacted, and that is by hosting foreign energies, or UBs. This is a concept that's more widely understood and accepted in other cultures around the world, and it's still not yet very well understood or received in ours. But today we're helping to change that by welcoming Robert Falconer to join us. An IFS therapy practitioner, teacher, and writer, Bob has devoted himself full-time to IFS work since training in it with its founder, Dick Schwartz, more than a decade ago, and by assisting Dr. Schwartz in many trainings and workshops. During the earlier part of his career, before discovering IFS, Bob worked with survivors of major trauma. His focus now is on the study and treatment of the others within us, also known as unattached burdens, or UBs. His new book, The Others Within Us: Internal Family Systems, Porous Mind, and Spirit Possession, a work of more than 10 years of research, was published in April of this year. Now I invite you to listen to my conversation with Robert with an open mind, while also giving any of your skeptical parts a seat at the table to listen into. Let's dive in. All right, welcome, Robert. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And we always start our conversations here with a brief check-in. So I invite you to share with us where you're joining us from in the world and how you're doing today at the levels of body, heart, and mind.
Okay. I'm in my home in the Santa Cruz Mountains, a little bit in the foothills of the Santa Cruz Mountains. And it's so nice here, I hardly ever leave. I'm sort of behind a park and in these rolling hills looking south toward the ocean. And so it's a wonderful, wonderful place to be. It was an old olive orchard in the 1890s that's all overgrown with all these other trees. But it's a very sweet location for me. I'm doing quite well. I'm working on 2 new books simultaneously, which I've never done before. And I keep getting the most fascinating and stimulating clients in the world and teaching stuff. And so life is sweet. I'm probably more joy-filled than I've ever been in my whole life.
That's something to celebrate. Yes. And yeah, that is such a beautiful part of the country and the world that you're in. And I can understand why you don't feel drawn to leave there. And I know we'll get further into your work today, but as we go, I'd be curious to hear about your 2 new books. And I can only imagine how interesting it is to do the work that you do with people. And listeners will understand more about what we mean as we get into our conversation. Yeah, so by way of that, we're here today to talk about your book and a significant body of your work, which is The Others Within Us, Internal Family Systems, Porous Mind, and Spirit Possession. And in this book, you share a lot. It's a very, very rich book with a lot of different perspectives brought in. And one of those perspectives is your own personal journey. And you have lived through a lot. I was kind of awestruck at the magnitude of what you have lived through. And you don't need to share all of it with us here because I know it's a lot, but whatever you feel called to share about your own personal healing journey and what first brought you to this modality of IFS.
Okay. Extreme capital T trauma. Father and mother, both sex offenders, both addicts, well hidden in a church-going family. My older brother also molested me. My father had his gay child molesting lovers living in the house with the family, and they would molest us boys too. Mom was institutionalized a few times when we were kids. My brother committed suicide when we were teenagers. My father was murdered a few years later, and by all odds, I should be dead or a junkie or something like, not a good prognosis.
Yeah.
But I'm doing well, and at 75, I'm thriving and happy and joy-filled and feel I have very productive life, and I'm actually doing good in the world. And most of my career, I worked with men who have histories like mine. And the bulk of my healing I did before I met IFS through various other parts work models, ego state therapy, Gestalt. Spent a lot of time with Gestalt, psychosynthesis, voice dialogue, all of that. But then when I found IFS, I thought, this is the most potent and respectful form of therapy. And I think it's potent because it is respectful and it does respect the client and, knows that the healer is within the client. And so I've been, pretty much 100% IFS for more than a decade. And now I think in a lot of ways, I'm sort of moving beyond the IFS model because I do a great deal of work in non-Western cultures. My wife's Korean. And so trying to expand it into a more global perspective, less Western, less Eurocentric.
And when you entered into the IFS fold and you share a story of you were a program assistant during one of the IFS trainings where you had a pretty profound encounter with what you're calling the others within us, and which the IFS model calls unattached burdens, or with acronym UBs. And can you share with us what is a UB, what is an unattached burden or an other within us?
Okay.
And what did you know about them prior to that initial encounter? And then we'll go into what that encounter was.
Okay. UBs used to be called critters, a name that Dick now doesn't like at all. They're energies in us that are not part of our own personal life history. And there are a lot of energies like this that are more acceptable, like legacy burdens and cultural burdens. And, there's hard science proof behind legacy burdens now with epigenetics, and they can create these things in rats and mice. And, that's the standard of truth in the Western world. If you can do it in rats, it's real. So these things are generally accepted. But you could just say unattached burdens are the things that are like that. They're energies that are not from our own personal life, but we don't really know what they are or where they come from. And I would put it this way, that there is a basic biopsychological dynamic that can have profound effects on people's lives for good or for ill, that's been found in almost every culture we have records of in every era of history. The metaphor usually used to describe this is spirit possession. But whatever you call this, it's real, it happens to people, and it's worthy of study.
And it seems like these kind of unattached burdens or these kind of foreign energies that we can take on. I think you mentioned in your book that can happen, especially when we're children. Mm-hmm. And in vulnerable states, like if we have a surgery or a sexual abuse or something very shocking, or where we're very vulnerable to other energies. Is that right?
Yeah. Anytime you're out of your body, it makes it easier for them to get in. So in the surgery, it's especially the anesthesia, I think, that makes, especially childhood surgeries, makes the children very vulnerable.
So let's talk about this encounter that you had with a student in an IFS training that you were assisting. Mm-hmm. Can you share the story of that experience?
I had almost no knowledge of this. I'd been told, hey, these things exist. You might run into them once in a while. And I, at the time, I'd spent decades creating this trauma-oriented view of the human psyche. And I thought I knew some stuff in my early 60s. I was pretty settled, and met this woman, and I was a PA, and there's a practice group with someone being a therapist, somebody being a client, somebody being an observer. And there was a guy working with this woman, and she had this, what at first looked like a internal critic in her, but it was absolutely relentless and hate-filled. There was no good intention anywhere that he could find. And I thought, this seems to be one of those foreign energy things, one of these unattached burdens. And so I asked him if I could take over the session, and he said, please. These things are quite disconcerting if you haven't, had any experience with them. And I started just asking this critic, what's your intention? Why are you doing this? And it just said things like, I want to destroy her. And then, well, what's good about destroying her? And then, then she won't be on the planet anymore. And what's good about her not being on the planet? Just kept drilling down and down and down, trying to find a good intention. There never was one. And finally it said, well, if I destroy her, it means I win. That's not a part. Parts always have a good intention somewhere. So the next thing I knew to do was have the person ask the thing directly, are you a part of my system? And she did that, and it didn't answer. It was very evasive. It said things like, well, I've been here a long time. Or, and I just had her keep asking. And then after 4 or 5 attempts, it finally turned and said to me, you're supposed to be a teacher. That's a really stupid question. Don't you have anything smarter to ask? And I sort of laughed, and I said, it may be stupid, but it's simple. Are you a part of her? And after quite a while of this, it roared out through her mouth. It said, no, I'm not a part of her. I'm a much more glorious being, and I'm going to crush her like a worm the same way I'm going to crush you. That's like classic sort of unattached burden, arrogance, contempt, all these things. And I was able to help her get this thing out of her using very, very simple, suggestions and things I'd heard. And it stayed out. I debriefed the group in a very rational way. And then I went to the staff meeting and my core body temperature dropped like 3 or 4 degrees and I was shaking and couldn't get warm. And the other staff, they were teasing me. They were saying, "Oh, you're the Ghostbuster." And I got really irritable and was snappish and inappropriate. And when I went to bed that night, I thought, I'm just going to forget this. This didn't happen. It's just some. But then I started getting all these emails from her from the airport. And the first ones were like, I can see colors I've never seen before. And I thought, oh no, I've triggered a manic episode. This is big trouble. And they got worse. I can see God in people now. And they were long, page long. And then she sent one that really changed my life. She said, Bob, I didn't tell you this, but when I was a teenager, I tried to kill myself many times and I was institutionalized many times. And when I tried to tell people back then about the non-human inside me, they gave me electroshock and injected me with powerful drugs. You're the first human being to ever believe me, and you've changed my life. And then I went, I can't ignore this. Oh man, where was my simple little trauma-oriented model? It was just all blown apart. This was like out of left field. And when she said that, it was like, no, I can't ignore this. And that was more than 10 years ago. She read my book and sent me an email and said, yeah, Bob, I did stay in touch with her. Still think that's a life-changing event and very, very positive. And it did, in following her external life, it did seem to have very positive effect on how she could be in the world. So, and then I got really interested, and because most people, when they send something like this, they don't want to have anything to do with it. I got a whole lot of referrals.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, send that one to Bob. We don't want to deal with that. So, and then, the more I worked overseas and in other cultures, they understand this much better than we do. So,
for sure. Yeah.
10 years of doing that, and I love research. So, the research bibliography to the book that I just published is over 32 pages. And I actually read all that stuff.
Yes, there's a lot of material in there, and a lot of the kind of cross-cultural references, comparisons.
Yeah. Somebody said extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So I tried to pull together a vast amount of material, at least to get people to think, whatever in the world this might be, it's worthy of study because it creates so much human suffering.
Yes. So you just spoke about how when you were working with someone, you were able to determine this was an unattached burden because it appeared like an inner critic part. But the more that you spoke with it, the more that you kind of drilled down, you were not able to get to a positive intention.
Yeah.
And one of the basic frameworks in IFS is that all parts have good intentions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was like the initial sign, like maybe this isn't a part. And then you asked it directly, are you a part?
Yeah. Now, Dick, I don't know exactly what he's saying today, but he used to say this is the one question they cannot lie about. They can lie about everything else. And I was saying that quite confidently one day, talking to an audience, and this wonderful, powerful woman from Nigeria yelled out, "They lie!" And when I got over my shock, I asked her to tell me more about how they deal with these in Nigeria. And she said, no, in Nigeria, they can lie about everything. And she also said sometimes they've been in the person so long, they've forgotten who they really are. Right. So they think they're actually a part of the person. But that's not been my experience. Occasionally, there's some little like waffles at the edge where they appear to be lying, but basically, no, don't seem to be able to lie point blank to that question.
Yeah, that's what I learned about UBs as well, is that they'll tell you. And that's been my experience when I've supported clients with
Mhm.
this, is that ultimately they will say, yes, I'm not a, or, they will say, no, I'm not a part.
Yeah, yeah. And they will try and avoid the question and do
Right.
all sorts of sleazy stuff. They'd make great lawyers and politicians. I interviewed a Polish exorcist who only worked with kids, and he said he never talks to them because they're so good at debate.
Right. And I find that I kind of feel like I'm going around in circles with them.
Yeah, they're
Like
really good at doing that.
I'm never able to get anywhere. Whereas when I'm with a part, ultimately we're led somewhere deeper. We're led beyond just these very negative comments,
Mhm.
negative narrative.
I think the biggest difference between what I do and what IFS does, I don't think of these things as evil beings that we have to have this great big struggle and fight. I think they're also suffering beings who are lost, and they're usually attached to that person out of desperation, fear, and starvation. And then they pretend to be all big and, oh, I'm tough and, all this contempt and nasty stuff. But under that, they're horribly suffering beings. And that I got mainly from the Spiritists of Brazil, who have an incredible history of working with this. And there are over 50 psychiatric hospitals in Brazil that are run by Spiritists. And they have a pretty good track record of working with psychosis in these terms of there are foreign energies, or they would say spirits or lost souls in these people.
And what do you feel like are, aside from what you discover when you're working with someone directly, like for a person who's listening to this right now, do you feel like there's any certain like symptoms or signs that one could have an unattached burden?
Well, it's that unrelieved negativity with no good intention anywhere. That's the number one thing. The other thing, rape and sexual abuse very often almost literally inject these things into people. When people are out of their bodies, they often get into people during poorly managed psychedelic sessions, because that's another time that people are very much out of their bodies. So if they've had an experience like that recently and then start having major behavioral changes. I want to tell one quick story here. This woman was doing an ayahuasca ceremony, which is usually done in groups. This was done in groups. She had a sense it was not well managed, but she went ahead and did it anyway. Driving home from that, she had an acute psychotic episode, was hospitalized. This was in California. Her family comes out from Chicago to take her home. And just trying to drive her back to Chicago, which is like 2, 3 day drive, they had to stop and re-hospitalize her 4 times because she kept trying to jump out of the car, and then she'd be completely lucid in herself, and she got home and she had a cousin, I think it was something, who was sort of psychic, and the cousin said, "Just tell it, I have nothing here for you but love, and say that as a mantra over and over again." And the thing left.
Mm.
It didn't, no more psychotic episodes, none, gone. And, she came to me later to try and make sense of this and make sure she was, all her parts were there. And I said, well, I've heard they seem to be allergic to love sometimes. And she said, I think it was just realizing that it wasn't a part of me was a huge relief. And that's why I think that's one of the things that makes it so important that we know that this can happen. This does happen. Things that aren't part of our minds get into us. And that, this whole idea of the porous mind, I think, is the major sort of implication of this. And it really, I think it could change therapy as much as the idea of multiplicity of mind that, is the foundation of IFS.
I agree. And I just, for anyone who's listening, and it's mostly women who are listening, I just want to share that the women that I've worked with, who I've supported in releasing these entities, have taken them on through sexual abuse. They've entered in during times of sexual abuse. And in my own life, I feel like I had an unattached burden, although I didn't know what it was at that time. I was able to release it. And it was on the other side of, I was engaged to a man who I found out was a narcissist and had been sleeping with many people while we were together. And so I realized that I was kind of exposed to a lot of different energy, a lot of dark energy. And on the other side of that, I just did not feel like myself.
Yeah.
And, doing a lot of healing and working through a lot of layers, I ultimately reached a layer where I realized this is not me. This is not mine.
Yeah.
And so that's another kind of example of how we can get these energies in us.
Yeah. I think they also can be passed down through our lineages. And, a lot of people ask, well, how do you tell a legacy burden, which we have hard scientific evidence for, and an unattached burden? And I say, I don't even really try. I use whatever the client, however they want to think about it. We're in both cases where this is a foreign energy, we're helping the person get out of their system. So, I don't think teasing that difference apart is so important.
Right.
I would like to talk more about this idea of porosity of mind, because I think this is so important.
Yeah, I agree. Go ahead.
This great anthropologist, Tanya Luhrmann, who I think is one of the great intellects alive on our planet today, unfortunately, therapists never read her. She says in the West, we've developed what she calls the citadel theory of mind, that like everything in our brains is our private stuff, it's all ours, and it constitutes our identity. And this is all like in this fortress. And that looks sort of really strong, but it's not. It's actually incredibly brittle and therefore really fragile. If we hear a voice or something that doesn't seem like part of ourselves, we can shatter. We can completely fall apart. And Tanya, I should call her Dr. Luhrmann. I've only exchanged emails with her. I've never even met her. So Dr. Luhrmann has studied psychosis and spirituality cross-culturally. And she studied it in San Mateo, Accra, Ghana, and Chennai, India. Guess we spend way over 100 times more than either of those countries on our treatment of psychotics. Guess who gets the worst results?
We do.
We do, yeah. Now, if this world, if human beings were rational at all, we would be over there studying what they do. That's not what's happening. We are exporting our methods, and it's very sad. And Dr. Luhrmann thinks one of the most important reasons behind this is because we have this brittle, non-porous theory of mind, and they don't. In Accra, Ghana, she has what she calls an ecocentric theory of mind or self, where they think they're part of a network of nature and divine beings. And so they sort of, when they hear a voice or have something come, it's not a disaster. In India, it's more of a sociocentric model, where they sort of, it's not weird to hear dead relatives or anything like that. So, these psychotic, what we would call psychotic symptoms, are not so devastating. And there's a wonderful woman in England that nobody I've talked to in America has ever heard of, Isabel Clarke, with an I, not an E, and an E on the end of the Clarke, developed something she called the billiard ball theory of mind. And she's worked with inpatient psychotic care her whole career. And she thinks this billiard ball theory of mind is responsible for how devastating psychosis is for Europeans. So they've come to the same conclusion from very, very different annals. And if you just start to step back and think for a minute, every living system is surrounded by a semi-permeable membrane. Every cell, semi-permeable membrane. Why would our minds be any different? But it's like so built into us by our culture and our language, it's almost impossible to talk about it. We like need to invent new words. That guy, Daniel Siegel, the interpersonal neurobiology guy, is trying to invent new words to talk about our interconnectedness and the permeability of our minds. Excuse me, I got on my soapbox a little, but I think this is
No, I think it's important.
Yeah, and it's exciting too, I think.
And it speaks to just our hyper individualism that we can't see past, or it's very hard for us to see past being these like individual insular selves
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
are not interconnected, and that brings us so much suffering on so many different levels. I mean, that's the basis of pretty much every spiritual tradition, but still we can't, our culture is just built around that.
Yeah. And in anthropology, they talk about the individual and the dividual. And an individual is what we have in the West, and it's pretty much limited to Western culture, and it's limited to like the last 400 or 500 years of Western culture. And then they talk about the dividual, and that's characterized by an interdependent sense of self and multiplicity of self. So, and that's almost everywhere else. And that was a woman too. Marilyn Strathern was the great theorist in that.
So we know that one of the signs that someone has an unattached burden is they don't feel like themselves, or they feel like after some sort of life event, there was a big shift in how they experience their life, how they experience themselves. And then someone comes into an IFS session or comes into a session with you, or someone who trains with you, and there's that inquiry, is this an unattached burden, or is this a part? And then when you find out, okay, this is an unattached burden, what are the steps for healing it at that point?
Okay, let me backtrack just a little. Another way, maybe the most common way people come is, I just sense this darkness in me. This whole area, this nasty, relentlessly negative darkness in me. And, so I think that might be the most common thing. I think in working with them, the number one thing is just keep its assuming a part, think it's a part, wait until it's really, really proven that it's not. Because if you try and move a part out of the system, you will destroy the system's trust in you.
Yeah.
And it will be very hard to repair that. So lean the other way. Lean, this is a part. We're going to find its good intention. Just stay in that department. And then when you know it's not, and it says it's not, then I'm very gentle with them. I say, you're lost, you are suffering, you're in the wrong place. I know you're pretending to be tough and big and strong and nasty, but we know you're a lost, suffering being, and we want to help you go where you can heal. And then I don't fight with them. The first thing is find any parts of the person who are afraid of it. And then you do classic IFS with that part. You establish a self-part connection with the frightened part until it can connect to the self so well that it's no longer frightened. And then it will let go of its attachment to the unattached burden. You can also just help them go to a safe, contained space behind you, but I much prefer to do the whole connect to self thing. Because I think these unattached burdens do us the unintentional favor of showing us all our most vulnerable parts that might take us years to find. They're sort of like ants in the kitchen. The ants are not trying to help you, obviously, but they show you where you spilled the food every time. They show you what needs your attention. So these unattached burdens will show you the parts of you who are scared, isolated, alone, needy, vulnerable, all of that. So the first one, anybody scared of it, get all the scared parts. Anybody going to miss this thing when it's gone? And you have to be careful because they might be really shamed. So I say things like, you're not bad or wrong if you took this in. You might actually have needed these energies to survive, to help them come forwards. And then again, it's just classic IFS, developing that self-part relationship. With these parts who are attached to unattached burdens, the key thing is just getting to have that very first taste of compassion and self-energy. Very often that is so hard for them. And, Michi Rose had that drop technique. Can you just take in a drop or half a drop of compassion? And how is that for you? Because, and once that compassionate, loving self-connection is established, usually it's pretty quick. Because self feels so much better at the end of the day than the unattached burdens. Because the unattached burdens are always parasites, they're always draining energy. And so I think you can be very confident that if you just stay with the patient self-part development, that will win, because that actually increases energy and well-being, as opposed to a parasite. There's some traditions that call these things the feeders and believe they feed on negative human emotion, but they do seem definitely parasitic.
And that self-to-part relationship that you're talking to circles back to what you were talking about at the beginning when you came across IFS and you just realized how potent it is, because it really activates the healing force that is already within each of us.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's strengthening that, bringing that more to the foreground in the case of having these kind of like these parasitic energies in us.
And we don't try and tell the parts who are attached to it, oh, that's so stupid that you'd hook onto that thing.
Yeah.
We respect their decision making and offer them love and compassion right where they're stuck. So we're very respectful of them too.
And I'm hearing you say that also validating them, of seeing, yeah, so it sounds like you had good reason to attach to this at some point, because that maybe helped you survive, helps you get through a really challenging life experience or something of that sort.
And Dick said what they offer is power to the powerless. And I think that's true the vast majority of the time. But they also sometimes offer companionship to the abandoned. And then they seem to work to keep people isolated so that they can continue to feed off them or, enhance their dependency.
And so in this past decade of doing this work with people, we know about the shifts that woman in the first training, that initial experience that you had. What are some other things that you've noticed in working with people who have unattached burdens, or within yourself? What have you noticed?
Oh, I could talk about that. My parents were pretty horrible, as I mentioned before, and I have some severe eye problems, a bunch of different retina diseases. And I was told about 10 years ago, you're going blind, you should learn how to use a cane, get ready. And I was actually working with Dick at the time, and we found this unattached burden in my eye, in my left eye, which looked like a spider with the tail of a scorpion. And it was poking my retina and causing these blisters and bleeding, which were the actual physical symptoms that were going on in my eyes. And we were able to work with, and it was my mother's energy, so you could call it a maternal introject. You could call it I don't care what you call it. We were able to get that thing out of there, and I'm doing way better than the doctors thought possible. I can still read, I can still drive, I'm doing well. And so that's kind of convincing.
Yes. And did you have the sense that the issues with your eyesight were related to an unattached burden, or you just had a curiosity about it?
Just went in there and looked. I work a lot with any physical symptom. I'll look for, are there any parts or any other psychological energies involved with this? I've noticed these unattached burdens are very often associated with autoimmune diseases. And that's just like an impression. I don't have any numbers or any,
That makes sense, because there is that kind of the quality of like the system like feeding on itself or attacking itself.
Yeah. And I also have had autoimmune diseases. So.
And in the IFS community, I know that UBs, at least for as long as I've been involved, hasn't been something that's been openly spoken about. And it's even been a little bit taboo. I know that I didn't learn about them in my trainings. I kind of heard about them through side channels. And then when I started to encounter them, or wonder if I was encountering them with my clients, it was my IFS consultant who was able to kind of fill me in on like the bigger picture of them and how to work with them. But it seems like since your book has come out, that there's more of an embrace and an acceptance of them in the IFS community. What has been your experience of
Yes and
this?
no. Well, Dick was angry at me for pursuing this field. And, I said, it's so important. I mean, look what happened, and it's real. He used to only teach about it in level threes, and he was very angry at me. But when he read the manuscript, he changed his mind, and he wrote a nice foreword to the book. And, he even said, I'm glad this isn't being kept secret anymore. But he was very afraid that this is so weird it would be used to discredit IFS. But still, I get a lot of, oh, weird Bob's been living in California too long, and, other less than respectful comments. And, a lot of the IFS world does not like hearing about this. And what I say is not very welcome.
And how is that for you?
Oh, it's difficult. But,
Yeah, I can imagine.
yeah. And I think if, I can explain unattached burdens in completely rational terms. There's no need for any woo-woo. Richard Dawkins, who is perhaps the most hyper-rationalist materialist guy on the planet, they call him the four new atheists. I mean, he hates religion or anything spiritual. He developed this whole theory of memes and memeplexes, which he called viruses of the mind. And he said there are these things, ideas or attitudes, and sometimes whole complexes of them that are contagious, that can go from one mind to another, replicate in that new mind, and then spread further. That's an entirely adequate theoretical explanation of unattached burdens. You don't need, anything at all spiritual. I mean, so I think a lot of the negative stuff is just people are really scared of this. It's, upsetting and weird. That was my initial reaction. I don't want to hear about this.
Yeah, it can be confronting and disrupt our sense of self, our worldview. Just like we were talking about all these things that we're conditioned into.
Yeah, yeah. And now I've come to feel that my previous, decades long developed trauma-oriented view of the human mind is still valid. Nothing wrong with all of that. It's in a much bigger picture. There's all this other stuff all around there that I'd completely ignored.
Yeah, there's the individual experience that's happening, but it's happening within the context of everything.
Yeah.
Everything impacting us.
Yeah, and I've really tried to discipline myself. People come to me because they're suffering, and my contract with them is to do my dead level best to reduce their suffering. And it is, I believe, unethical for me to exploit their suffering to try and further my research. So I've got this very pragmatic attitude. What can I do to help reduce this person's suffering? And because of that, the question you ask determines the whole course of the inquiry. It's given me a very different direction and thrust. So if people ask me, what are these things? I don't know. I don't know if they're spirits or, memes or memeplexes or, I don't know. But I do know there's certain ways you can handle them that seem to work pretty well. And that's something we can reasonably expect to get a good idea about. Whereas these things of what are these and what's the nature of the interior world's reality, those are like, we could argue about that forever and get nowhere.
In your book, you mentioned that you were going to create some trainings around this. Is that something that you're offering now, or where are you with that?
Yeah, I want to offer a whole bunch of courses online. And I jokingly, one of my friends said, well, you want to offer you be you. And through Life Architect in Poland, Michael Paterski, I did a 4 half-day class series on unattached burdens. And that's going to be, that's there and available online through his organization. And that's like the big introduction. There's also a 3-hour one through Derek Scott in Canada that's like the short introduction. And there's a whole bunch of YouTube stuff attached to my website. And then my plan is in the future to record a bunch of advanced classes. So then people can go through this and take as much or as little as they want, you know.
And what are these 2 new books that you are working on?
Well, one is for 30, 40 years, I've been collecting quotes and little stories that I find really helpful. So it's just sort of compiling those and putting those together and publishing it. And there more and more, I think the deep healing is always spiritual. And that also is not too popular an idea in therapy land. But so these quotes tend to be in that direction. One of them I like that I think is sort of funny is, oh, how did it go? Talking about therapy without spirituality is like trying to consider the ocean without wetness. You know, real healing requires some kind of depth, especially for major trauma. So that's one book. And then I'm working with the Swedenborgian Foundation to produce a book comparing IFS and the work of Emanuel Swedenborg. Maybe I should say a word or two about who he was, because so few people know and they should. He died in about 1785. And for the first 40, 50 years of his life, he was probably the foremost scientist of his day. And he was really hardcore. He was the manager of the copper mines for the Kingdom of Sweden and designed all this mining equipment and military fortifications and watch design. And he did the first neuroanatomy book in your, you know, really hard. And then when he was about 50, he started having visions. And for the rest of his life, angels and demons took him on guided tours of heaven and hell. And with his scientist mind, he wrote this geography of the other worlds. And it's 30 volumes, which were originally written in Latin. But they're amazing. I mean, they're amazing what this guy saw. He's just writing these like very sober descriptions of, oh, there's this. And there are churches based on his work. And he was actually incredibly influential to a lot. William James was influenced by him. D.T. Suzuki, the famous Zen Buddhist, wrote a book about him that called him the Buddha of the North. So, and there are at least a couple psychologists who use his work to help them work with the voices schizophrenics here. So he's an amazing guy, unfortunately really difficult to read. But a lot of his work is very, very relevant, I think. So that's the other project.
Sounds like you have a lot of interesting things that you're engaged in, interesting things ahead. And we started out talking about your personal, your history, your big T trauma, and how today in your mid-70s, you feel like you are the most joyous that you've ever been. I know we've touched on a lot of things that have led you to this, but I'm wondering if you could just share more explicitly what do you attribute to your deepest healing of going from where you were, the background that you had, to where you are now?
Well, I think one of the things that really helped is I'm stubborn as a mule. And a long time ago, when it was before I knew IFS, but I knew about parts, and I had this vision of the basement of my family home, which is where a lot of the rapes and beatings occurred. And I just vowed to myself, I'm never going to close the door to this basement until every last part is free from there. And I've stayed with that. And also, some of the beatings were so severe as a kid. I was frequently beaten unconscious. Some of them, especially ones involving suffocation, created what I think are near-death experiences. I'm not sure if that's really the appropriate term, but I went into another world and I met a merciful female presence which is so bizarre in the middle of sadistic rape to meet him. And I think somehow that little taste early on in the midst of rape and, beatings and all this other stuff was really important. I'd like to claim credit for where I am, but I think, spirit had a lot to do with this. And
yeah, and it sounds like in those moments when that female being came to you, that was just grace entering.
And the sad, I became enraged at her and I cursed at her because she kept sending me back.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't find her for decades. And I blamed myself for that. How could you be such an idiot to curse that? And I've done a lot of expressive art stuff, dance, painting. I think that's really, really important. I think the healing power of dance and movement is vastly underrated in the therapy world, and we tend to be talking heads.
I fully agree. And I just really want to emphasize for listeners, because I know there are a lot of people listening who have been through big T traumas and things that you don't feel like you're going to be able to ever overcome, and can feel hopeless at times and frustrated. And just to say that it is that stubbornness, or in IFS we call it, the persistence of our self energy, of our essential self, that persistence and that patience, just to keep going with it. And it does take time, but if we stay with it and stay with the model and stay with that connection to a higher power, or that which is greater than us, that healing is possible.
Mm-hmm. And I think I'm glad you mentioned higher power, because I think I love the 12 steps as opposed to many therapists. I think they're magnificent. And I think one of the things they did is they sort of dumbed down spirituality enough so that it's acceptable to the modern Western mind. And that phrase, higher power, is a key part of that. I mean, everybody, even the most rigid, fortified atheist, has to go, well, there's something bigger than me. I've been in Al-Anon for years, and you could just take people down to the ocean and say, do you still think you're the biggest thing around here? It's like ridiculous. So, and I think IFS sort of does the same thing. It sort of coaxes spirituality in a language that makes it acceptable to the modern Western mind.
Yes, because we can scare people away. Like I love the G word. I love God, but I know that it scares a lot of people. Yeah. So we have to find language that includes.
Yeah, and self is very much that language.
Yes. So what is your current growing edge in this season of your life?
I would say it's deepening the contact with spirit, and more wanting to be guided. And there's a phrase, I think it's from Thich Nhat Hanh, deep listening. So I have a practice that takes me several hours every morning, praying, checking with my parts, deep listening. And I live up here in the woods. I go out and I dance with the trees before dawn. And so I spend a great deal of time trying to maintain and encourage those connections and to really listen and actually get my arrogant, proud mind out of the way a little bit.
Sounds like you're doing it. Yeah. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you for just being a role model of healing and transformation, and just the courage and the tenacity and the faith just to bring this body of work into the world.
Thank you. And if people want to find out more, I have someone who puts together a website and a YouTube channel for me. I've never even looked at my own YouTube channel, but I've been told it's pretty good. So robertfalconer.us, and then you can get a great deal of information.
Great. And we'll put that link in the show notes, as well as the link to your book.
Okay, great. Wonderful talking with you.
Likewise. Thank you, Robert.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining me today. And remember, change doesn't come from listening alone. I invite you to commit to taking one small or large, courageous action after today's conversation. One step you can take, if you haven't already, is to sign up for my Sunday journal. It's a weekly newsletter filled with inspiration and reflections about the intersection between spiritual entrepreneurship and fulfilling your potential to help you become the woman you truly are in every area of your life. You can subscribe at programs-sarahavaughnstover.com/journal. And if you found this podcast valuable, please share it with the women in your world. Also, I'd be very grateful if you'd leave a review. It helps others find resources like this, and I'd love to hear what's coming alive for you after listening today. Above all, keep going, and never forget the unique offerings you and your true self bring to the world. Until next time, I'm sending you my heartfelt support.